Welcome to the ASA show here on RotoGrinders.com. That's the Advanced Sport Analytics show. We're talking NFL Week 4, batting first, leading off, a returning champion. It's Stewart Gibson. What's going on, Stewart? We're going to talk Week 3 in a second. How's Week 4 treating you, at least in the early weeks? We're recording this on a Wednesday night for the people out there, just so you know. So obviously the information may change as the week progresses, but all our thoughts are pertaining to what's going down as far as a Wednesday night. Stu, how's life treating you? How's football treating you these days?
Good. Returning, not so much a champion and a bit wounded. I I don't know. I actually didn't do terribly on the main slate. I was kind of like just on the double up cusps. I actually got pushed over with like that big Keenan Allen drive at the end. But I was excited to talk showdown slates this week, and had been kind of enjoying those and playing those reasonably well early this year, and didn't do so hot on the Thursday or Monday showdown. So I don't know, limping in to Week 4 a bit, but hopefully gonna pick up the broken pieces and put it back together for Week 4.
It was by default returning champ. It was an intimate show. Like, you beat nobody. It was just the two of us, I suppose. But, and my week didn't go so great either. I guess we'll talk about that. We'll reminisce. It's DFS. All we care about is this week. We don't care about next week or the one that just happened, but it's also worth to talk about because I had way too much, Carson. And, and I feel like a lot of people way too much Carson. He was like, just in the way the information kind of, flooded in throughout the week was that, Penny not playing. It's like, he had some fumble issues. And that's a new thing for him. And I just think the general idea of like, a guy fumbled, we can't play him ever again, because that doesn't mean he's going to fumble going forward, but I guess you can't play a guy after they fumble. I don't really know how that works. I'm not bitter though. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice. Not bitter at all. Yeah. Bird was not the word, unfortunately. I had way too much Bird, and that did not work out for me either. Also joining us, Brandon Adams. You guys know him from the poker world, from the DFS world, from the guy probably at the top of many DFS contests these days. Brandon, how's life treating you?
It's great, man. I'm super happy to be on the show with you. You were a request for this podcast. I've been a big fan for a long time.
Am I blushing? Do I look flattered? I appreciate that. Likewise, the feeling you
I just love everyone that laughs at their own jokes.
Is that what I do subconsciously? Oh no, I don't want to be that guy. Is that me?
No, it's a comforting voice. I've been following for a long time.
I appreciate it. How's the football? We're still at the quarter pole, basically rounding out after Week 4. How's football treating these days? And how's Week 4 looking for you?
Yeah, it's been a good season. I had some astonishingly good starts of the season the past couple of years, and this year I'm at about break even, which is odd. Like football, you're highly levered not only to your best lineup in an individual week, but if you're a tournament player, you're highly levered to your best lineup for the whole season, which is kind of a crazy concept, and it speaks to just how high variance football DFS is. But I've had the unusual experience of being break even the first 3 weeks despite playing tournaments. Which feels kind of good because there were some opportunities where it could have been one of those weeks where you bink everything. But yeah, I'm optimistic going forward.
Yeah, it is the big swings. It is amazing how 1 week can definitively change your season, depending on 2v2 or 1v1, and that's all it takes to move the needle for sure. It's pretty incredible how that works. You do all the research, and it comes down to, should I play this guy or that guy? But that's how it goes sometimes.
Well, a lot of people will play multiple contests in a way where it's theoretically possible where you could have Eric Crane's $2.2 million lineup from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, Sanu, by the way, egregious. Why is Mohamed Sanu in his lineup? Come on, no ceiling of Mohamed Sanu. I don't know why I'm taking shots at Crane from 2 years ago. Come on, what are you doing? He must have been at home on the turf in a good matchup or so or something like that. Stuart, we want to look back, Stuart, just to take a peek as far as what went down for Week 3. Some of the new quarterbacks that jumped in there, and how do we feel they're going to be doing going forward as far as Week 4?
Yeah, I think the story with Week 3 was just could you get on one of the young quarterbacks who kind of just were thrust into a starting role? not a ton of tape on them as far as, giving us the ability to know with certainty how they're going to perform. But, both, and I'm referring to Daniel Jones and Kyle Allen. We had, Mason Rudolph in there as well, who, did not win you a tournament, I would assume. And, Gardner Minshew was on the main slate, but I wanted to bring up Minshew because he's been interesting, so far in 2019. But, yeah, I mean, I think, what's tough with these guys moving forward is, do we expect what we saw in week 3 to, be something we can expect for them moving forward, or is it kind of a flash in the pan? And then also just we can also discuss more generally like the process of thinking about a guy who's thrust into a starting role, whether it be quarterback or like lead running back who, we just don't have much, game tape on or data on. And, how do we kind of think about, if that guy's a viable play? And I mean, I think with Kyle Allen in particular, like we were talking before the show, like, didn't matter if you thought Kyle Allen was good or bad or, what have you. At $4,000 playing against the Arizona Cardinals, like the guy just had to put 4 quarters together, and there's like no way he wasn't going to reach value. And, I'm pulling up now on our dropback efficiency and frequency app, just the efficiency time series for Kyle Allen, Daniel Jones, and Gardner Minshew. And we had talked about last week. I mean, Kyle Allen has seen like pretty decent efficiency metrics, when he, had a spot start last year in week 17. And I mean, I think you could reasonably expect him to, hold like the fort down and not, put up like just terrible fantasy metrics. But we saw him over here in week 3. I mean, this insane efficiency of, almost 0.9 fantasy points per dropback. I don't know about you guys, as I can't really see him, carrying that efficiency through, moving forward. I mean, just the matchup was too good. It just seems like such a spike, given the script we have on him in the past, including like what he's done this preseason, per dropback. So I don't know. For me, Kyle Allen's like a guy who can't really project moving forward the way, we saw him perform, this past Sunday. What do you guys think?
Yeah, Brandon, the price is up. The matchup doesn't look as appealing. And, speaking of those guys, Danny Dimes, people love saying the nickname too. I'm looking at the early, very, very early ownership projections. And as of right now, of this grouping of these 3 guys you're talking about, as far as Minshew, and as far as Allen, we have Jones as the second highest projected guy from an ownership perspective on DK as of right now. Quarterback, the ownership never really gets too high. We're seeing it 9.8%. Again, this is on a Wednesday night. These things do change. But he looked great. People love the nickname. The Giants are our national team. Nationally, we saw Washington get absolutely shredded by Trubisky. So I think of this grouping, I think the most popular guy clearly is going to be Jones. Brandon?
Yeah, no question about that. He will be insanely popular, cash game lock, and deservedly very popular in tournaments. I think for me, in tournaments, I'll just go ahead and take the chalk this week and play Jones, Wilson, and Mahomes almost exclusively with a lot of Mahomes. Stewart and I have talked about it a bit this season, but because the pricing has become more condensed for quarterbacks, you've tended to have a situation where your highest projected fantasy point per salary dollar is actually at the quarterback position. So you should, unlike a lot of previous seasons, be inclined to spend up at quarterback. So I think if you just had a strategy of being highly weighted towards Mahomes in all good matchups this season, it would be like a fine strategy for tournaments. It would almost be, to put like an MLB equivalent on it, it would almost be like if your elite pitchers on the night also had a 20% higher projected fantasy point per dollar. That would be like, you should just be highly inclined towards the chalk spend up options. I think, I'm not sure I totally agree with the pricing, but you should be erring a bit this season towards the Mahomes of the world, because they have better upside potential and better distributions overall.
If you roster him at any point this season, he's yet to disappoint you. He's now at 7.5K on DK, and I'm sure you've heard people talk about like value and players getting value, and a lot of people say you shoot for the value score on DK for cash games so you want 3x, a $50,000 salary, so like 3x of 7.5. But like you said, as far as the quarterback position, I sort of think in my head, and of course like 3x at 3K is different than 3x at 9K. It's a different conversation. But, as far as Mahomes or as far as quarterbacks, I want 4X, like if you're going to do that thing. And of course, it's all sort of like general rules and general guidelines. Is that something you abide by, or is that something you think is nonsense, that the 3X, 4X thing?
I think it's pretty much nonsense. It's so dependent on the exact slate.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, like, given the type of scores that it's taken to win even like a 2,000 person contest, much less a 300,000 person contest in the past few years, you really need to think not only about the multiple that you're getting per player, but like what is the positional value? Can you afford to have even like a 18 at one position, even if it's a great multiple? Like you might need to have the position just score higher than that in absolute numbers. So, I think with quarterback, you should be inclined towards allocating a relatively high dollar amount and hoping for that 35. For me personally, I found myself spending up for quarterback a bit more this season. And you look for the big multiple, since you do need a multiple on the overall spend, you look for the big multiple from your 3 and 4K guys, not from your 7K guys.
Yeah, exactly. People were saying last week, like Allen was 4K, and if he's going to hit value, if he's going to hit 3x or 4x if he gets 12 or 16 points, and there's a certain value to that position where, and guys like Mahomes are going to double his score, like that 12 to 14 or 16 point score, depending on how you're looking at it.
Yeah. You don't want that from the quarterback. You want that from the $3,500 guy that can get that in one play.
Correct.
That can get that multiple in one play.
What are your thoughts on this, Stewart?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Mahomes has been very solid, and there have been kind of these guys who are like at this high tier of pricing, but have shown the ability to get up like over 30. And, yeah, I mean, like you said, like, a guy hitting 3X at like 7 to 8K is just so much more valuable than, your 3X guy hitting 3 or, something like that. So yeah, I mean, I have been paying up at quarterback this year. I think it's tough. I mean, to try to follow that lineup construction, but then not lose sight of some of these guys who are like very clear values down low, like Kyle Allen, or we might have with Daniel Jones this week. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's, it's kind of a laborious task of balancing that want to pay up at quarterback where, your cash, where your salary dollar maybe goes a little further versus not, overextending yourself or bypassing like a value down low.
We're going to further expand as far as our favorite plays at quarterback, running back, wide receiver. We'll do that soon enough. There's a couple of things we want to hit on as well, and just some general thoughts. I mean, like, of course, talking about Mahomes, other guys as well. And I think it's interesting that you're already at like 3 quarterbacks, Brandon, like kind of hone in on. Like they all make sense. And as we always talk about as far as the ownership, it's never really too high as far as quarterback. But to just sort of expand on the idea, because people just sort of talk about DVP or tournaments like it's this overarching like general concept, and you sort of referenced it, and I think it's an important thing that people don't mention enough. Like the lineup construction when you're facing 300,000 lineups as opposed to facing 2,000 lineups is distinctly different. I just don't think people, a lot of times, that's not communicated the way it should be. Like when you build a lineup and you're facing 2,000, you're going to be building it differently when you face, 5-10 times that, correct?
Sure. So I think if you're in a GPP with 2,000 people, your lineup doesn't have to be too wild. Like you can be not very far off a cash game lineup. Actually, the Millionaire Maker lineup for this past week was quite clever. I'm sure everyone here follows Empire Maker on Twitter. He commented on how it was actually quite a nice lineup construction. All of the individual players were high equity, high projected fantasy points per dollar. There was also some nice built-in correlation in the lineup, and it was just a little bit off kilter. So there were some deviations in particular spots that made it overall a quite clever lineup. And it happened to win a 300,000 person tournament. In general, I think you want the slight deviations in your 3,000 person tournament. For the 300,000 person tournament, you can be inclined to go off the board a little bit and take those 1% and 2% plays that are almost certainly duds but might hit, like, our Miami guy, Kenyon Drake, or something like this, right? Balaj, whatever. Your sprinkles of guys that no one's gonna have, but Drake might pop off for 31 week. If you don't mind, I just want to interrupt one thing on quarterback. I neglected to mention Rivers in the conversation. I have been dutifully watching the Miami Dolphin games.
Sorry.
Yes. It's been quite notable that the quarterbacks can put up good performances even if they do not pass the eyeball test. Brady looked pretty terrible and put up a good fantasy score. It's just that they have possession all the time. So they almost can't fail. Like, I actually think that Rivers, there's no chance that he fails. And they're going to have possession all the time. And if he gets inspired for one reason or another, he could put up a score that no one on the slate can match. So,
go ahead. Sorry.
I will have Rivers as well.
You feel obligated to run it back with somebody in the Miami side if you're making like a Charger stack?
No, if I did, it would be a highly unusual run back like Drake, for instance. Yeah. Although I don't know if you've been watching, but Balaj has been taking some of the carries, and I still think it's a Drake thing. So yeah, Drake would be the guy.
Yeah, Stewart, do you watch the Dolphins? I mostly watch the red zone, so I tend to avoid pretty much any offensive play with the Dolphins. I mean, I know I've seen box scores, I've seen highlights. I know they're in uniforms, they're actual players playing for the Miami Dolphins, but and I think I threw a couple darts at Preston Williams or something like that.
Yeah, Preston Williams passed the eyeball test. He might be the guy. For me, it would be Williams or Drake.
Parker's been like an air yards guy, but like, there's been no efficiency for what it's worth. But yeah, it's the Dolphins. Man, I'm sorry. My brother flew down for that game. My brother lives in South Carolina, and he flew down to watch the Patriots. He's not even a Patriots fan. Just he had a buddy. He's like, he tagged along, and what was that? That was an absolute disaster. Just getting a flashback to how bad the Dolphins have been so far this season. And Stewart, should we react to these things? To small samples, it's just 3 games, but they're looking historically terrible. And it just sort of like as a general thought, like when we see like so and so versus tight ends or so and so versus wide receivers. Like, it's this weird sort of push-pull thing because you need a big sample. Like, at least I like a big sample. A lot of times it's like matchup dependent, but by the time you get a big sample, the season's over. So, like, how do you handle things like that? You're going to hear all week, I'm sure, tight ends against Arizona. That might truly be a thing because tight ends against Arizona have absolutely crushed, but it's kind of sort of a small sample. But, Will Dissly, we'll talk about him soon enough, is going to be a thing week 4. People are going to be loving him some Will Dissly. He's also super cheap. So, like, how do you handle that as far as, like, the samples aren't that big, and at what point do you trust them, and then all of a sudden we're at the end of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I find myself trying to look at our distribution app and see just what guys have, like, this big tail. Like, there's just not that much, I think, value to hitting on a guy who is 1% owned but had, like, that he just hits value, or, like, puts up value. Certainly in tournaments, like, you need him to be a hit and really, like, in excess of value. So, I don't know. I haven't had really like a whole lot of success with some of these kind of dart throw, low ownership plays, but when I am targeting guys, I'm trying to find, a guy who, when he does have that 10%, top 10% type game, it's upside for a really big one. Like one play I I tried and failed at this week was, on running back Miami was Jakeem Grant, who I thought was in a decent spot. Like he, is, a big play, receiver, and also on punt return, I think gives him, access to maybe a very high kind of top 10% ceiling for him at his price. Then also with Albert Wilson out, I thought kind of there was maybe a little more leeway there for him to, be kind of the de facto, big play guy. Didn't work out, but, definitely trying to use those dart throws on guys whose ceiling is exceptionally high and maybe whose floor is even particularly low. I don't know, I guess either fail miserably or, have that low ownership on, a guy who just reaches that like 10 ceiling, that 10% ceiling.
So my big picture view on this slate is that this slate is going to have a more condensed player pool than any slate I can remember. So I do think that this might be the dart throw slate, because when I look at the reasonable options for running back and wide receiver, it's a quite condensed pool this week. So for me, the value of taking the punts that are actually fairly low salary, that are fairly low fantasy point per dollar, but might hit, that the value is strong this week, just because I do feel like ownership is going to be quite condensed at every position.
Let's have that conversation, because how do you handle that? And it's case by case, I presume, depending on what your take is. Like, for example, Barkley being out, Wayne Gallman currently projected at 37.9% ownership, which is a really, really big number. Of course, that price is not fully adjusted to his presumed new role with the Giants here. Now, they did call somebody in. It's Wednesday night, but as of right now, at least where I'm sitting, he's going to get the majority of the touches there versus a Washington team, and he's priced at 4.6K. Brandon, do you take a stand on that? Do you say I'm going all in, I'm going to fully fade, I'm going to kind of stay with the field, or is it general case by case and just whatever your feel may be?
For me, this week is exceptionally weird, and I will be having many more lineups than usual that are looking like cash game lineups, and they just have one or two unusual pivots. That's just how I will go about it this week. I think this week is weird because you have a lot of unplayable teams. Dean, you might not be that familiar with the advanced sports analytics research, but we put out some stuff a couple years ago that was looking at the type of lineup constructions that typically win slates. We put some of it in our book, Advanced Fantasy Football. But one of the interesting findings is that, of course, the projected team score that's in an over-under is a median number. And every fantasy player knows that you should focus on high implied point totals. But if anything, our research shows that that's even more true than the casual player thinks. And the reason is because if you look at one team, Team A, that has a projected total of 20, and you look at another team, Team B, that has a projected total of 25, the probability that Team B hits, say, 40 total points is a vast multiple higher than the probability of Team A hitting 40 points. And 50 points, Team A, it will happen never, ever. And the team that implied for 25, it will happen every once in a while. So you should, because we need to be concentrated on those teams that have the highest score if we're going to win tournaments, you really want to focus on the high projected totals. And there are many teams this week that are basically unplayable. We only have eight 1 p.m. games and 4 afternoon slate games. So we have 24 teams, and by my take, a lot of them are completely unplayable. Oakland is probably unplayable. Buffalo is unplayable. Miami is completely unplayable. Tennessee is basically unplayable. Arizona is unplayable. Jacksonville and Denver are unplayable, and Chicago and the Vikings are unplayable. So we've got a really condensed slate here. And the player pool in terms of the guys that can flash upside is likewise very condensed. So I think we're going to see, not a boring slate, but a slate where, to me, the ownership, the reasonable plays are quite condensed, and you could make your stand by just having one unusual play in that lineup.
So the follow-up is the team that has a 25-point total as opposed to the team that's a 20-point total. But if you can project the pie, the delegation of fantasy points on the 20-point team with the 20-point total to be much more significant pieces, like, for example, not these are accurate, but like the Chargers, you just know Keenan Allen's going to get his, right? You know that Eckler is most likely going to get his. Maybe he goes to Jackson if this game's a blowout, especially. But just how the slices are sort of delegated out, and then trying to figure out, okay, New England, we saw this last week. New England's projected to score 30 points. Okay, now figure out who's going to do what. And it made it a little bit easier with White, not being in a team for having a baby. Congratulations, them. But just sort of that thought process of 25 points projected is not 25 points projected, right? Like you have to sort of figure out, okay, now where are the fantasy points going to go?
Yeah. So the question then is, given that we have a limited number of lineups that we can put in, are you better off focusing on the high scoring situations and taking the B and C options from the high scoring situations, or taking the A options from the 18-point projected totals? I would argue that on this slate, you're better off pivoting towards the B and C options on the high projected point total games. That's what I'll tend to do. I will sprinkle in the occasional like Wallers or if it's a 300,000 person field, a Drake or what have you, but Corey Davis in the 300,000. But you have basically a lot of unplayable games, and you're better off taking your chances that it's like, I don't know, Fuller that goes off on Houston rather than taking your chance that it's some Oakland wide receiver.
Do you agree with this approach this week, Stewart?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one thing that's sticking out to me this week is that in previous weeks, I think we've had clear front runners, like which team we expect to, be kind of like the team that can support the most fantasy production, Dallas and New England. Last week just matched up so well against Miami and New York. And, obviously like Miami is still on the slate again, but, our point projection app, doesn't have any team really popping as like just a, heavy front runner to lead the slate in terms of points scored. Last week, I think we had Dallas as like a 25% chance of topping the slate in points. And this week it's actually pretty even at the top. There's kind of like three teams that, stand ahead of the field as like the most probable, point topping teams. But then beyond that, I mean, you just get into a lot of teams in kind of like this 3 to, 6% range. And then as Brandon mentioned, there's a handful of teams that are just like, 1% chances of topping the slate. And, I don't know. I haven't looked terribly closely at the DraftKings lobby, as we're only here on Wednesday, but, I don't know. I imagine I'll kind of take my usual approach of targeting some of these, teams like 2 through 6 or whatever. And I think it actually maybe plays even more so this week where there isn't one like, albatross team that's just, so projectably ahead of some of the other teams. I think it sets up nicely for kind of a, picking from kind of teams like 2 through 6, 3 through 7 type thing.
Yeah, you got KC and the Chargers and the Rams there. And the Rams are the perfect example, right? It's like, who's your favorite Ram receiver? I don't know. Just play them all and just figure it out and just get multiple combinations. Like, Brandon, have you cracked that code? Do we know who the best Rams receiver is yet? Or I don't know.
No, but those situations are perfect GPP situations where it's one of them. So for me, it might be Cooks this week, just from a from a GPP standpoint, he has nice distributions over his career. Actually, Cooks and Woods both have better tournament distributions than Cup, although Cup is the hot hand of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I would tend to lean towards those guys, but this is for me a good illustration where you're better off going with different slices of the Rams rather than trying to pick, I don't know, the Arizona player that does well. So you try, and Goff is like a buy low candidate at the moment as well. He's very unfashionable, but to me, he has the type of profile that has upside. So I actually like the Goff and 2 wide receiver combos, and just rotate around, hope you hit the right one.
Yeah, we're going to jump around as far as our favorite plays in each position in just a second. We do want to touch on a couple more things.
And by the way, just to say, I don't really ever bet on football games in terms of sides and so forth, but the Tampa Bay might be able to keep this game close, and this is the type of game that has a nice ceiling. So yeah, this might be my favorite game stack of the week.
Yeah, that's the what 48.5 as far as the total. The Rams are a 10-point favorite. I guess the one big concern is that maybe like the Rams, just their D line just overwhelms that offensive line for Tampa, and they just can't get anything off. But if Tampa can get going, I agree. We definitely can see like a 35-24 kind of game, or 35-27. That'll be good times for sure.
And do we agree in terms of like eliminating the field that there are a lot of unplayable situations among these 24 teams? I mean, just I don't know if you watched the Chicago game, but it would seem that everyone in that game is unplayable to me. I can definitely scratch off the Vikings and Bears, even though we love all the individual players. We love Cook, we love Diggs, we love Thielen. Montgomery might have some upside at some point in the season, but how can we really play any of these guys? We can't play anyone in Miami. I can't imagine myself playing anyone Jacksonville and Denver. Arizona guys in a big field, you might take a chance on Johnson and Kirk only. It's a pretty condensed field. So for me, my approach is going to be, I'm going to play chalky stacks. Like I'm going to have a Seattle stack. I'm going to have a Ram stack. I'm going to have a Giant stack, and I'll have a Houston stack. I'll have a Charger stack, a KC stack, and some Ryan Julio. I'll just run chalky combos that we know work.
You got anybody in that grouping, Stewart? Any of those guys in those teams where he's basically Xing off? Anybody that you like to not X off per se?
Well, I forget what the list is exactly, but like I don't know. Did you say Denver was on that list? I'm sorry, Detroit was on that list. Like I do like some.
No. Detroit. I mean, Galladay is going to be. That's actually a great game to stack in general, because I think you have on Detroit 6 playable guys: Stafford, Kerryon, Galladay, Hawkinson, Amendola, Jones. Maybe not Amendola, but you have basically 6 playable guys, and then KC is the favorite. So for me, you want a lot of variations of Mahomes, Watkins, Kelsey with 3 of Stafford, Kerryon, Galladay, Hawkinson, Amendola, Jones.
Okay. Yeah, totally agree. I was forgetting if that was like a team you had on there. I mean, I don't know. I kind of have to look at it more. But I don't know. Buffalo, I think, was a team you X'd off, and like they do have some guys who can put together some big plays. I mean,
So I used Oakland as an example earlier, as not to try to pick a guy, but Tyrell distributionally has the right thing for tournaments. So you could play Tyrell as a complete dart throw, and then on Buffalo you could play Brown. But for me, Detroit has amazing tournament characteristics. Kerryon looks like the best tournament play on the slate this week. He passes the analytics test and he passes the eyeball test in terms of just really looks like he wants to do it. He wants to be a guy this season that's on the elite list. So for me, he's the best tournament play of the week. Gallman, I think, is bad chalk. Well, we don't know what's going to happen with the Giants roster exactly, but Gallman, I mean, hasn't ever done anything as far as I remember. Dean, do you have a different DFS memory than that? Like, hasn't he
underwhelmed
before?
Yeah.
He
has not actually smashed. In my brain, he's not had like this absolute smash game, and he's had opportunities before.
Yeah, he's a guy that maybe sneaks into your cash game lineup because it might just be too many opportunities. He's too likely to get to 18 or whatever, but the probability that he's getting 30 DraftKings points is close to zero from what I recall. So, I would not have him in any tournament lineups, and carry on. You could lock him in if you wanted to. So, I think Detroit just sets up very nicely. Galladay obviously has extreme upside, and Marvin Jones is an upside type player. Although his projections are not amazing for this game.
Yeah, you mentioned carry on his, C.J. Anderson getting booted from the team that kind of opened up his snaps last week, and you said he wants it more. It's funny. He was actually tweeting out about like wanting it more. I'm not sure if that's who you were referencing or something like that, but
no, that's not what I was referencing.
Yeah,
but he had like I don't know if you caught the Twitter meme of he tried to jump over the guy, but he jumped too early. But like you know that the guy who's trying to jump a tackle, you're basically risking a broken vertebrae when you do that, right? So you want it.
You know who's not doing that is Todd Gurley. Like Todd Gurley's like, nah, I'm good. I'm just gonna step out of bounds.
Yeah, like
I don't need 2 more yards.
When you try to like get a 2.5 foot vertical over the 300 pounder that's coming to tackle you, like that's I don't know. That says you want it to me.
And Vernon Davis does it at like age 34 or whatever it is. He's done it multiple times this year, so good for him. We appreciate that as fantasy players. But stay healthy too, Vernon. We wanted to touch on just sort of general concepts, I suppose, as far as the showdown slates. People love the showdown slates, Brandon. Did you play these at all? Because I dabble for funsies. To be perfectly honest, I'm not like the guy to like lean on as far as best advice. And you can argue small sample size and you're just kind of sort of throwing darts. And some people just try to get all the bases covered. And it's funny coming into we're recording this on Wednesday night. It'll be out there on Thursday, and leading up to that Philadelphia game, like Philadelphia with the mess is trying to figure out who's going to score their touchdowns or get their touches is a perfect or not so perfect, depending how you look at it, showdown team, because there's a lot of different options there to choose from, and none really jump off the board, but a lot of guys can do it.
Yeah, so at Advanced Sports Analytics, we haven't really begun to tackle the showdown slates, but it's in a sense right up our alley because we focus on distributions and correlations, whereas other analytics sites focus on median distributions or median outcomes. So I think the showdown slates are really all about distributions and correlations, because in a showdown slate, if I'm playing heads up against you, I really care a lot more about having a tight distribution of outcomes than I do about having a higher projection, because it doesn't benefit me to have a guy who might score 2 touchdowns but often has a close to zero game. It really doesn't benefit me in the showdown slate. It's about just sort of being the Golden Glove center fielder that's just right there with a medium strength lineup every night. That's how you win in the head to heads. And then the tournaments, these are really quite absurd things that we have with like 200,000 people and you have a limited player pool and everyone knows who the best plays are. Like this is kind of a crazy concept, but there, most of the game is about avoiding duplicated lineups and getting the whole projected odds that you're entitled to, and the way that we do that is by having lineups that have upside but have little shot of being duplicated mightily so.
Yeah, I mean, I've been interested in the showdown slates because I do feel like you do have this limited player pool, but there are more degrees of freedom with regards to like what positions you can select, and the whole captaining a player that can be at really any position or can be a kicker or defense. Like, to me, it opens up, like, I think maybe edges that are a little different than we might see on a regular slate, where like the challenge of kind of a main slate for the most part is, at least in cash, like projecting players and condensing this large universe of players with pretty tight restraints on like where we can plug in players aside from like flexing a player, and figuring out like which player is the highest value. Showdown slate to me feels a little different, where your player pool is pretty narrow, and I think for the most part people get a sense of like what players are good and what players aren't. But positionally, I think there's a lot of work we can do on figuring out which positions, and really thinking of positions as like roles, roles that players play in a game, and how that position or role relates to game script is, to me, like pretty tantamount. So I actually this week like just kicked off kind of a little like one-off analysis that hopefully we'll probably publish in terms of a blog, and I would love to put together some sort of like predictive tool around it that looks at lineup construction, not really from a player specific standpoint, but from a positional standpoint. And, obviously like showdown, in terms of like team selection is kind of zero sum, right? Like if you're picking, the underdog, for 2 players, you have to have 4 on kind of the favorite team. And I've kind of put together this model that, looks at, how kind of our exposure to different teams and exposure to different positions or like roles, can change around, game total, spreads and stuff like that. I put together this kind of crude logistic regression, and this is looking at, specifically at cash games, which I think lend themselves towards what's called like a logistic regression, where you're looking at kind of a binary outcome, like win or lose, doesn't really matter by how much, or how little. And, just trying to find kind of like what are kind of good best practices for implementing in terms of just hitting that one, hitting the win, not the loss. And I don't know, the results are somewhat in kind of preliminary stages, and I'm just looking at like the last, I think, few weeks of data points. It'll be interested to see kind of how the trends play out over time. But I was looking at kind of all these variables in context of like how they relate to a spread and kind of increasing or decreasing point totals. And I don't know, I can maybe just go through quickly and like summarize some of the results I'm finding. Unfortunately, I don't have it like in an application form, but we're seeing that in kind of neutral game environments in terms of like average totals and pretty even, low spread or near even matchup. It actually is a bit advantageous to give a little more exposure to the underdog. Again, this is like kind of not really my opinion that's coming through here. I'm just looking at like the model results and kind of what the coefficients are suggesting that, there's a higher win probability if you are going with, in kind of a neutral game environment, a very even exposure to the different teams, maybe even slightly more exposure to the underdog, giving like two players to the favorite, 4 to the underdog. But in general, it's kind of a best practice to captain a player who's on the favored team. And in particular, is seeing like, increased win probability when you're captaining a player who gains fantasy points through the air, whether that's a receiver or quarterback. Seeing like tight end showing through as a position that kind of captains well. Not sure if that's like a small sample size or what. It kind of seems like an odd position to just be like, we must captain tight end. But, I thought that was interesting. It seems like running backs, I don't know, like they become less predictable in kind of these neutral game environments, especially with more of these running back cut by committees where there are running backs who their volume is tied specifically to like a certain game script, and these neutral game environments, like teams just kind of go like an in-between where it becomes hard to project like which kind of role running backs will really succeed. Let's see. In neutral game environments, it seems like kickers are particularly viable, as where when you do get kind of like a skewed high spread, like they become a little less viable. And like needless to say, as spread increases, the exposure to the favored team, increased exposure to the favored team becomes increasingly desirable. I think that makes sense. Like, if we can expect a team to put together more points, we want more of that team. It looks like, they suggest that captaining a QB actually becomes less desirable with increasing spread. I don't know. I have like some, like, I'm not really sure why this is coming out, but maybe one hypothesis is just like to produce a game, a game that produces a high spread has, one quarterback that is kind of at an increased probability of failing, and one quarterback who's at a high probability of being on a team that plays from the lead, such that, their reliance on them isn't quite, as necessary. So I thought that was an interesting, point that the model was showing. As we can project games to be more lopsided, it becomes increasingly valuable to captain a running back. And like, we saw that a couple weeks ago with like Nick Chubb, who really hit well and that partially happened because he didn't have his backup running back behind him. But, it does seem that maybe as games become more lopsided, it becomes increasingly valuable to focus on running backs, whether that's a kind of a rushing role running back that you expect to play from ahead, or a pass catching running back that you expect to play from behind. Thought that was an interesting note. And I don't know. In general, it does seem like as team total increases, there becomes an increasing importance on skill players. Quarterbacks and kickers are quite viable, like in low total games, but as point total increases, we see a higher win probability by increasing the number of skill players you roster, and also by rostering a skill player at the captain position. I don't know. My hypothesis there is just like skill players have access to the 6-point touchdown, as where quarterbacks in general kind of have that 4-point touchdown. But one thing that's worth calling out, like, even if like wide receiver is a desirable position to roster heavily or even captain, it's also like for many teams kind of a harder, like you were talking about pieces of the pie. Like, okay, we want to captain, Philadelphia. If we wanted to captain a Philadelphia receiver this Thursday, or a Philadelphia pass catcher, including like tight ends, it's not quite as clear like who that should be. It could be Aguilar, it could be Alshon Jeffrey coming back, it could be Zach Ertz, as we're like quarterback. There's only going to be one quarterback, that, if you're focusing on like the underdog or focusing on the favorite, right? Like you're just choosing one of one. But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was interesting, and I'll kind of, I think, on the ASA site, draft all this up in maybe blog format, maybe even put like a predictive app together. But yeah, just some notes I had from this, logistic model that I put together. Yeah, I thought it was some interesting findings, and I'm definitely, as the season kind of rolls out, continuing to update it and see kind of what trends are presenting themselves. Cause I do think, these showdown slates kind of offer an opportunity to, really look, for edges in regards to kind of roster construction from a positional and, game script standpoint.
Yeah. So this is going to be a bit of a transitional season in that clearly the showdown slates are taking on more and more importance from the site's perspective. It used to be, for instance, that they would focus on the Thursday through Monday slate or the Thursday through Sunday slate. And then, when the 4 p.m. games were over, they would have the primetime slate that would be, Sunday night and Monday night. Now they've gone towards this showdown slate, this 1-game slate. So it's clearly taking on more importance from the site's perspective. And it's going to be a transitional year from the player perspective. I think a reasonable hypothesis is that since it's taking on more importance from the site's perspective, the sites will price it more efficiently, which from a DFS perspective, it's always important to know when you can count on a slate to be priced efficiently versus not, because the site has a difficult problem. They have to price the same for both 300,000 person tournaments and head-to-head cash games, which is always going to be a difficult problem. But what that means for, say, a Major League Baseball slate, if it's priced perfectly, we could expect that the heads-up lineups will be highly dollar-weighted for pitching and then punting, hitting most of the time, whereas the big field tournament slates will be low-priced pitching and high-priced hitting, just based on the way the distributions play out. For Showdown, it's somewhat similar, where if the pricing is perfect from the site's perspective, keeping in mind that they have this impossible problem that they have to price the heads up and the 300,000 person tournament at the same time. What that will in general mean is that when you're playing a heads up match, you're going to want to focus on playing the players that have the tight distributions. And when you're playing the tournaments, you're going to want to focus on making unusual pivots at the captain spot and or playing people that have the high upside distributions. So in heads up, most of the time, you're going to want quite boring situations where you have the tight distributions, like you play two kickers or something like this, and the quarterback at the captain. I think most of the time, for heads up, the lineup is quite a boring lineup. That is a low variance lineup. And why is the optimal heads up lineup often having two kickers, or at least one? Because they tend to be priced in a way where they could conceivably be used in a tournament, which, because of their distributions, means that they have to be priced at high projected fantasy point per dollar. And for heads up, they're always going to have the nice property that they're guaranteed to score some middling amount of points. And then, of course, choosing your quarterback for the captain spot, it's the same logic that they're guaranteed to post a half decent number in your captain spot.
I want to play Showdown slate now. I was always in the fence, and I'm like, whatever. But you guys, it's a pretty big pitch. I feel like I've learned a lot, actually. My thing has always been, I just sort of create my own narrative. Like, well, what if this score is 30-3? What does the box score look like? And you try to figure out the correlation and things like that, obviously. But lots of good stuff to take in there. And a lot of people most people don't think nearly as in depth as far as a Showdown. And it seems like simple in concept and theory because there's only so many players to play. But, when you break it down that way, I'm excited. I will be playing Showdown this Sunday night. I don't know who's playing.
People are pretty sharp, man. Like, I don't know. The Bears D at the captain spot was insanely popular.
Yeah. And
if you watch that game, like that was a sharp play. I think in some of the high dollar things, 40% of people had Bears D at the captain spot or something. This is insane.
Wow.
And that
is a big number.
That was kind of a sharp move. Ex post, I didn't do
it. We promised to talk about some picks, some of our favorite players at each position. Brandon, you kind of already said, like, at least as of right now, as of a Wednesday night, you reserve the right to change your mind. You like Mahomes at the top. You talked about Wilson as well. Mahomes, I think this is his first game ever in a dome, by the way. Is that weird? That seems surprising, right? Greatest show on turf going to Detroit. Also, as of Wednesday night, Slay is dinged in the secondary for Detroit. If he doesn't go, even more reason. Play Mahomes twice. It's an even better play, I suppose. Stewart, as far as quarterbacks this week, who's jumping out for you?
Yeah, I like Mahomes. The indoor turf thing I think could work well for him. And if there's a lot of people trying to pay down for Jones, I think there's a good opportunity to pay up there. I don't know, one kind of like similarly priced pivot away from Daniel Jones. Jacoby Brissett's been pretty solid so far this year. Has got a good matchup against Oakland, also a dome game. And, yeah, I mean, the Colts have looked good and moving the ball well. And you know, Jacoby hasn't like been, you know, this like Lamar Jackson, like, you know, big run type breaker, but he does factor in with his legs and, seems to be a fairly active runner, when the Colts into the red zone. So I think it's kind of an interesting, play down there around Daniel Jones if you kind of want to build lineups that are similar to what people are going to be doing with Daniel Jones, but kind of just move off them in a little way. Jacoby Brissett kind of interests me.
Would you need Hilton? He's currently questionable.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, if he's not playing, it does, I think, make him a tough play.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. The weapons just seem super, super limited.
They're cheap. That's something, I suppose, if you want to make that argument. I mean, Mack, it doesn't seem like a great correlation because he's not a running back that catches the ball a ton. And we'll talk about running backs in a second. I like Mack, assuming he's good to go and, ready to play his regular allotment of plays. But as far as other quarterbacks, Brandon, you said you're keeping it fairly concise, just keeping it simple, right? You're not going to be goofy here.
Yeah, I think you can keep it really tight. I think Rivers is a guy you can go with. Mahomes is like the A+ option, your best option. And then
Russell Wilson right there in the middle too. I think.
And then,
play.
Yeah, Wilson and Jones.
They're going to be so heavily owned though, you know.
Yeah. And then you can sprinkle in some Lamar and, personally, I've always had Ryan every week because it's just, he's a guy that by the data and the eyeball test, he's just a highly volatile guy. And he has Julio. He has the weaponry. He can go off at any time and just at the wide receiver, because I do think it's a fairly straightforward week. We know who to play this week, but every week have a lot of Julio. By the distributions, by the eyeball test, like it's just amazing how fast he puts up the fantasy points. Like you just every week.
Yeah, I mean, Goff is also something I'm considering as well. If you expect that game to shoot out to some degree, and if you think Stafford's gonna be playing a little comeback, throwing the ball a little bit more, I don't mind him. He's pretty cheap on DK as well. Stafford at 5.5K, and I'm not ready to just give up on Kyler Murray, but he looked really bad last week. That offensive line looks really bad, but I'm still not ready to cross him out, and maybe use some recency bias in your favor. Stewart, feel free to throw anybody else out as far as quarterback, or we can touch on some running backs.
I'm down to go on the running back.
Fire away.
Yeah, I mean, talked about him already. Carry on, I think, in a great spot. In the dome, KC, could jump all over Detroit early, but I think Carry On's kind of a multifaceted guy. And I just love like what his volume has been doing over the last, really to start the season. I mean, he started, down where he just really wasn't getting like a quarter of Detroit touches. And every week he's just been factoring more. Once I get this app to load, can pull it up. But yeah, he's been factoring more and more into the Detroit, offensive game plan. And, so I'm really high on Carry On this week. And his price so low. I mean, this could be, the last week we see him, sub 6. I mean, so I got his volume time series up now. And I mean, he started the season below a quarter of, Detroit touches. He was up near, over a third of Detroit touches last week, and he's just been kind of on a steady climb. So I like Carry On a lot.
CMC, are we paying up for him? So
the answer for me is going to be no all season. So I mean, I've been wrong, but that's just going to be my answer. So.
Why no all season?
It's something that Stewart and I touch on every podcast, but it's related to upside potential in tournament lineups. Now, McCaffrey was in the Millionaire Maker winning lineup last week, and it has been a good play to play him for the past year and a half. However, I think steady state, you don't want to be paying this much for running backs if you're trying to win 300,000 person tournaments. If 8,800 of your $50,000 is going towards a running back where, yeah, they can occasionally bust out the huge play, but for the most part, they're getting small little fantasy points with lots of time off the clock, and you're hoping for the 30 points. It's not a great spend if you're trying to win a huge tournament. It has worked in the past year and a half. It's unlikely to work in the steady state. He's really affecting your ability to get the lineup as a whole over 250 fantasy points. In my mind, when you spend 8,800 for one running back, the probability of your lineup hitting 250 plus fantasy points goes way, way down. Now, look, you've been able to make it work the past year and a half, but I think steady state, it's not a good idea.
What about Eckler, 8K? Can you pay 8K for a running back?
Again, I would not do it in Eckler's case, for a combination of reasons. Eckler's data looks amazing this season, but he's on the uptrend. For me, he's not talent-wise the guy that I would pay 8K for. The matchup is very good, but you have to say rationally, why would you really push it? You don't need to. You can coast to victory to Miami.
So Jackson.
Like, Miami played out of their mind last week to get one touchdown. So you have to think, like, why would they press this guy? How is he going to get 40 fantasy points? Is he just going to play to the wall every play for the whole game? I don't think so. So for me, no, you don't spin. For me, this is a week that you take your chances. You play carry on, a lot of carry on, and then you take your chances at RB2. You have to love Devonta for tournaments. I don't know. Do you watch a lot of Atlanta games?
No, well, I know that Ito Smith has a concussion, and what did Freeman play? 90% of the snaps last week? So if he plays 90% of the snaps this week, and Freeman's is he like 5K or something like that?
5K, yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, and he has amazing distributions for tournaments. Also, just in terms of narrative, Atlanta fans love this guy. Like, everyone wants this guy to really succeed. This week sets up nicely for him to have his game. And like, he's always passed the eyeball test. He's always passed the tournament distribution test. Like, this guy has some just crazy games. So he would be a guy I would take chances with. Chris Thompson, even though the team sucks, I would take some chances there just because he has the right tournament profile, and at 4,500, I like his distributions. Fournette, our data says no, but I think he's a guy you could have a sprinkle of.
You can't talk me into very much Fournette this week. I mean,
yeah.
his efficiency is just so bad. Like,
yeah,
I get the volume case there for him, but man, I mean, I've been getting talked into Fournette, the last couple of weeks, even against my, better judgment, just given, I mean, the guy just, like, he gets a lot of touches, but he just does so little with those touches. I don't know. I can't really be talked into Fournette this week.
Yeah, and Marlon Mack with the 26-19 projected point total, like, he's a guy that could very likely have 2 touchdowns. He's a decent tournament option, and you could take your chances with New England running backs. You could have some David Johnson. You could have some Justin Jackson. Just maybe he's the guy that gets 2 TDs. Like, I think you can take some punts at running back this week. That's kind of what it's going to take. I'd rather take punts at running back than wide receiver this week.
Stewart, I know we're up against the clock, so we got to kind of pump out a couple of receivers for the people out there, maybe a tight end or two. Who are your favorite receivers? Just fire off a couple of names. Feel free to throw out a tight end as well.
Yeah, I mean, Keenan, obviously, Lockett, I think, pairs nicely with Russ. And, yeah, definitely interested in taking some shots with the Los Angeles guys. Cooks is kind of my de facto preferred receiver, with Los Angeles. But I mean, man, Cooper Kupp, you can't really argue with his results lately. And he's really like, I think the knock with him has always been he lacks that high ceiling, and he's really shown it lately. So I don't know. I see myself maybe, becoming a little more bullish on Kupp, moving forward. Tight end, probably won't stray too far away from, chalk like Disley. I think at that price against Arizona makes a lot of sense. Olsen's price hasn't climbed up a ton, and, I think he's looked good so far. I mean, injury with him is always a concern. And, with Daniel Jones, I mean, he's kind of maybe could reinvigorate Evan Ingram. I mean, he looked awesome last week, and, they were really looking for him kind of with some downfield plays. So, those are some guys that I like at tight end.
How about yourself, Brandon? A couple receivers, a couple tight ends, maybe a game stack or two that you like, and then feel free to tell the people maybe they're just discovering Advanced Sports Analytics, ASA. Let them know how they can find you and learn more about your sites.
Sure. So I think wide receiver is pretty straightforward this week. You play a lot of Keenan, even though that's boring, and he's just so likely to have a big number. You play a lot of Lockett. You sprinkle in the Rams receivers. You play a lot of Sammy Watkins, love Galladay. You play a lot of Hopkins. He's a fairly high probability to be wide receiver 1. You play a lot of Julio. You play some Odell. Then if you watched Monday Night Football, Trey Quinn is a great play at 3K. He actually, just by the eyeball test, had not even a great game, and he still posted a pretty good box score. Like, it seems likely that regardless of box score, regardless of game script, he'll post a pretty good stat line. And he's only 3K, so that seems like kind of a tournament staple this week. And then there are a lot of worthy punts. If you will go to Advanced Sports Analytics and browse our player distribution app, you can just sort of choose your low projected fantasy point per dollar guys based on guys that have flashed upside in the past. They tend to be guys that are speed guys, like your John Browns. On the high price, Godwin's a guy that's going to have some pretty big upside this week. Even as we mentioned earlier, like Tyrell on a terrible team should have some upside. Christian Kirk. Tight end, I think Ingram is going to be very, very popular this week because he's a natural pairing with Jones. He's your best pairing with Jones. So, I'll tend to be pretty concentrated, I think, at tight end this week, paying up a lot for Ingram, paying up a lot for Kelsey. On some Detroit stacks, I'll have some Hawkinson, I'll have some Disley, I'll have some Ebron. But for me, a lot of paying up for Ingram and Kelsey.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. I'm not sure if we still have Stewart. I'm not sure if he's still with us or not. He may have took off for a second because he had things to do. We got things to do as well. Again, one more time, Brandon, if you want to tell the people about ASA before we step aside and get out of here.
Sure. So Advanced Sports Analytics, Stewart and I have been working on it for 4 years. We are intended for the serious tournament daily fantasy sports player. We fill a hole that other analytics sites are not really occupying. We focus on distributions and correlations. So we're really focused on trying to find those tournament winning lineups, those lineups that flash a lot of upside. We do all of the major sports and golf. Give it a try. We do weekly memberships, so you can just give it a try for a week and see how it goes.
There you have it. Good luck, everyone, as far as week 4 for For Stewart, who I don't believe is with us any longer, thanks for watching. For Brandon Adams, I'm Dean. It was fun.
Dean, this was fun. This was fun. It was great to get on a pod with you. I've listened to you many times.
Like I
And I love your background. I love the Marlins Stadium.
There you go. It's an amazing park. It's a very nice park. All right, y'all. Good luck crushing this week as far as football week 4. He's Brandon. He was Stewart. I'm Dean. Thanks for watching. We're out of here. Enjoy.